The gunshot echoed through the valley like a clap of thunder, sending a flock of startled crows into the crimson sky as the stagecoach rattled to a stop on the dusty road leading into Salida, Colorado. Inside, Nora Sullivan clutched her worn leather valise to her chest, her knuckles white with tension as she peered out at the silhouettes of mountains against the setting sun of 1875. The conductor's voice came sharp and hurried everybody out. Now. And Nora knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Men in bandanas circled the coach, rifles raised, while Nora and the other passengers were herded into the cooling evening air. She had left Philadelphia with such hope after her parents' deaths, answering an advertisement for a governess position with a respectable family in this frontier town. Now, watching as the bandits rifled through luggage and pockets, she realized with sickening clarity how naive she had been. "What have we here?" The tallest outlaw approached, his eyes appraising Nora from beneath his hat brim. He was lean and wolfish, with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. "A pretty little thing, ain't she, boys? Bet Harlan would pay good money for this one." "I'm a governess," Nora protested, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm expected by the Wilson family in Salida." The man's laughter was cold. "Wilson family left these parts months ago, sweetheart. Seems you've been had." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward his horse as the other passengers watched, too frightened to intervene. "But don't you worry. Harlan Fischer's saloon always needs pretty faces. You'll fetch a fine price." "You can't do this." Nora struggled against his grip, her honey-brown hair falling loose from its pins. "This is kidnapping. There are laws," he snorted, hoisting her onto his horse. "Out here, the only law that matters is who's holding the gun, and right now that'd be me." The journey to Salida took less than an hour, but to Nora, it felt like crossing into another world entirely. The small frontier town appeared suddenly from the wilderness, a main street lined with wooden buildings, lamplight glowing from windows as night descended. The outlaw and his companions rode directly to a large two-story establishment with a gaudy painted sign. The Silver Dollar Saloon. Men in various states of inebriation loitered outside, their eyes following Nora as she was dragged from the horse. Inside, piano music competed with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. Women in garish dresses moved among the tables, serving drinks and sitting on patrons' laps. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as she was pulled toward a stocky man behind the bar, a man with a waxed mustache and cold, calculating eyes. "Harlan," the outlaw called, "got something you might be interested in, fresh off the stage." Harlan Fischer wiped his hands on a stained apron and came around the bar, studying Nora like a horse at auction. "Where'd you find her, Ray?" "Stagecoach robbery. She says she was hired as a governess, but the family she named left months back. No one's expecting her then." Harlan nodded, satisfaction creasing his face. "How much?" "200 ought to cover it." "Highway robbery," Harlan protested, but his eyes never left Nora. "150. 175, Ray countered. "Look at her. Educated, still got some class. Your customers'll pay extra for that." Nora found her voice, though it shook with outrage. "You cannot sell a human being. This is 1875, not before the war," Harlan chuckled, reaching out to grasp her chin. "Sweetheart, I ain't buying you. I'm buying your debt. You owe Ray here for saving you from being stranded with no prospects. Now you'll work for me until that debt's paid off." "I will do no such thing," Nora whispered, jerking her face away from his touch. "You will if you want to eat," Harlan replied simply. Then he counted bills into Ray's waiting palm. "Take her upstairs. Maggie'll get her settled." Nora was led up a narrow staircase to a hallway of small rooms, fighting back tears of rage and terror. A hard-faced woman in her 40s met them at the top, cigarette dangling from painted lips. "Another one, Harlan. Get her cleaned up, Maggie. Show her the ropes. She starts serving drinks tomorrow." "And if I refuse?" Nora challenged. Harlan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll find yourself with nowhere to sleep, nothing to eat, and nobody who gives a damn what happens to you in a town where men outnumber women 5-1. Take your chances if you want, but you won't last a day." When he left, Maggie looked Nora over with something between pity and resignation. "Save yourself the heartache, honey. I've seen your type before. You'll fight it first, then you'll see sense. Nobody escapes Harlan Fischer." "There must be a sheriff in this town," Nora insisted. Maggie barked a laugh. "Sheriff Bennett. He's in Harlan's pocket same as the mayor. Now come on. Let's get you a bath and something to wear that'll earn tips." The room Nora was given was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a small window overlooking the main street. Maggie brought up a copper tub and helped fill it with hot water, then laid out a red dress with a neckline far lower than anything Nora had ever worn. "I won't wear that," Nora said quietly. "You will if you're smart," Maggie replied. "Listen, girl, the sooner you earn your keep, the sooner you can buy your way out. Harlan keeps accounts of what everyone owes. Most girls never manage to pay it off. He sees to that with his creative bookkeeping, but some do. Those who fight him, they don't fare well." Left alone, Nora sank into the hot water and finally let her tears flow. She thought of the life she had left behind, the modest but respectable existence teaching music to Philadelphia's young ladies, and the dreams she'd harbored of adventure in the West. Now she was property, bought and paid for by a man who would use her until she was used up. But as the water cooled, so did Nora's despair, hardening into determination. She was 22 years old, educated and resourceful. She would find a way out of this predicament. She would play along for now while looking for any opportunity to escape. When morning came, Nora dressed in the red gown, pinning her hair up as modestly as possible despite Maggie's protests that men pay more when they can imagine taking it down. She was given a brief tour of the saloon, the main floor where drinks were served, the back room where higher-stakes poker games ran through the night, and the rooms upstairs where some of the women entertained customers willing to pay extra. "You'll just be serving drinks for now," Maggie assured her, noting Nora's pallor. "Harlan likes to break in the new girls slow, gives the customers something to look forward to." The saloon began filling by noon, and Nora was thrust into service carrying trays of whiskey and beer to tables of miners, cowboys, and local businessmen. The men's eyes followed her, hands reached to pinch or pat as she passed, and comments ranged from crude compliments to explicit propositions. She endured it all with gritted teeth, reminding herself that each day brought another chance for escape. It was during the crowded evening rush, 3 days after her arrival, that Nora first saw him. He entered the saloon with none of the boisterous swagger of most patrons, just quiet confidence, as he removed his hat and found a seat at an empty table in the corner. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he surveyed the room with a detached interest that suggested he was there for purposes beyond drinking or gambling. Maggie nudged Nora. "That there's Jacob Harrington. Owns the biggest cattle spread east of town. Not a regular here, must be in for business." Nora delivered a whiskey to his table, keeping her eyes downcast as she'd learned to do to avoid unwanted attention. "Thank you, miss," he said, and something in his voice, a gentleness unusual in this place, made her look up and meet his gaze. "You're welcome, sir," she replied, startled by the directness of his steel-blue eyes, the way they seemed to look past the gaudy dress to the woman beneath. "You're new here," he observed. It wasn't a question. Yes, quite new. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. You don't belong in a place like this. Before she could respond, Harlan's voice boomed across the room. Nora, table 6 needs drinks. She hurried away, but throughout the evening she felt Jacob Harrington's eyes following her movements. Unlike the other men's leering stares, his gaze held something else: assessment, perhaps, or concern. Near closing time, as Nora gathered empty glasses, a commotion broke out at a poker table. A miner, drunk and angry over his losses, lunged across the table at his opponent. Chairs toppled, women screamed, and Nora found herself shoved aside as the fight spilled toward her. She stumbled, losing her footing on the sawdust-strewn floor, and closed her eyes against the expected impact. It never came. Strong hands caught her, steadying her before she fell. Jacob Harrington set her upright, his touch respectful even in the chaos. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low against the din of the brawl now being broken up by Harlan's bouncers. "No, thank you, Mr. Harrington." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You know my name." "This is a small town, or so I'm learning." A hint of a smile touched his lips before his expression grew serious again. "How long have you been here?" 3 days. And before that, Nora hesitated, uncertain why she felt compelled to answer. "Philadelphia." "I came west to be a governess, but the position fell through." Understanding darkened his eyes. "And Harlan offered you work." "Harlan bought me," she corrected in a whisper, "from the men who robbed my stagecoach." Anger flashed across Jacob's face, not at her, she realized, but on her behalf. Before he could respond, Harlan appeared beside them, his hand closing possessively around Nora's arm. "Evening, Harrington. Don't often see you slumming with the rest of us." "Fischer." Jacob's acknowledgement was curt. "I had some business in town." "Well, don't let me interrupt if you're looking to conduct some business with one of my girls," Harlan said with an unpleasant smile. "Though Nora here is still getting her bearings, might not be ready for private entertainment just yet." Nora stiffened, humiliation burning her cheeks, but Jacob's expression remained impassive. "Actually, I'm here about those cattle you're buying," he said evenly. "Word is you're paying above market rates. Makes a man wonder why." Harlan's fingers tightened on Nora's arm. "Just being generous to the local ranchers, community spirit and all that, right?" Jacob's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. His eyes met Nora's briefly before returning to Harlan. "We'll talk business another time, Fischer, when there are fewer distractions." He settled his hat back on his head, nodded once to Nora, and walked out into the night. "Stay away from that one," Harlan warned, releasing her arm. "He's trouble." "He seemed perfectly civil to me," Nora replied, unable to keep a hint of defiance from her voice. Harlan's eyes narrowed. "Harrington's been a thorn in my side since he came to these parts. Thinks he's better than everybody because he's got some education and money. He doesn't understand how things work out here." "And how do things work, Mr. Fischer? Men like me run things, sweetheart. Men who understand that everything and everyone has a price." He patted her cheek. "Remember that, and you'll do just fine here." That night, alone in her room, Nora pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching as the town quieted and the stars emerged in the vast Colorado sky. The window didn't open far. Harlan had seen to that after a girl tried to escape last year, according to Maggie, but through the narrow opening, she could smell sage and pine on the night breeze, a reminder of the freedom just beyond her reach. Jacob Harrington's face came to her mind unbidden. There had been something in his eyes, a decency, perhaps, that seemed out of place in Salida. But she couldn't afford to place hope in a stranger, no matter how different he seemed from the other men who frequented the Silver Dollar. Nora's days fell into a grinding routine. She served drinks, dodged wandering hands, and endured increasingly persistent suggestions from Harlan that she graduate to more profitable work upstairs. Her only ally was Maggie, who slipped her extra food and warned her about particularly troublesome customers. "How much do I owe now?" Nora asked one evening, watching Maggie record the day's earnings in Harlan's ledger. Maggie hesitated. $212. That's more than he paid for me. I've been working for 2 weeks. Room and board, honey, plus that dress you're wearing. And there was the broken bottle last week. He charged you for that. Nora sank into a chair, despair washing over her. At this rate, she would never earn enough to leave. That was by design. Of course, Harlan's system wasn't meant to be escaped. A week later, Jacob Harrington returned to the saloon, this time accompanied by 2 other ranchers. They took a table in the corner, and Nora was assigned to serve them. As she approached with their drinks, she caught fragments of their conversation. "Can't prove anything yet, but those cattle are definitely being moved north through Hayes Canyon." They fell silent as she set down their whiskeys. "Thank you, Miss Sullivan," Jacob said, surprising her with the use of her surname, which she hadn't shared with him. "You're welcome, Mr. Harrington." She hesitated. "How did you?" "I asked around," he replied simply. "Hope you don't mind." One of his companions, a gray-haired man with weathered features, raised an eyebrow. "This the one you mentioned, Jake?" Jacob nodded, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. Miss Sullivan came west for a teaching position that disappeared before she arrived. Had some bad luck with the stage coach. The third man, younger with a handlebar mustache, frowned. "And now Fischer's got her working here. Damn shame." "I manage," Nora said stiffly, uncomfortable being discussed as if she weren't present. "I'm sure you do," Jacob replied, and there was that gentleness in his voice again. "But a woman of your education should be teaching, not serving whiskey to minors." "Are you offering me a position, Mr. Harrington?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "As a matter of fact, I might be. My foreman's children need schooling, 3 of them, ages 8 to 12. Their mother died last winter and they've fallen behind." Nora's heart leaped, but caution tempered her excitement. "Mr. Fischer might have something to say about that. He believes I owe him a considerable debt." "How much?" Jacob asked bluntly. $230 last I checked." "The amount seems to grow daily." The older rancher whistled low. "Fischer's games never change. Keep him in debt, keep him working." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I'd be willing to settle that debt, Miss Sullivan, in exchange for a year's commitment teaching at my ranch. Room, board, and a fair wage included." Nora stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because I've seen too many good people chewed up by men like Fischer," he said quietly. "And because those children need someone who cares about more than just survival." Hope, dangerous and fragile, bloomed in Nora's chest. "Mr. Fischer may not agree to let me go." "Leave Fischer to me," Jacob said, and something in his tone suggested he'd dealt with the saloon owner before. "Can you be ready to leave tomorrow afternoon?" "I have nothing to pack," Nora admitted. "Just what I'm wearing and my traveling clothes." Jacob nodded. "I'll come for you at 4. With any luck, we'll be at the ranch before dark." Nora returned to her duties with a lighter heart than she'd felt since arriving in Salida. The possibility of escape seemed almost too good to believe, and throughout the night, she cast glances toward Jacob's table, half afraid he might vanish like a mirage. When he left with his companions, he caught her eye across the room and touched the brim of his hat, a small gesture of reassurance that carried her through the remainder of her shift. Morning brought doubts. What if Jacob changed his mind? What if Harlan refused to release her? What if this was some elaborate trap? But deep down, Nora knew that Jacob Harrington represented her only real chance of escaping the silver dollar before Harlan forced her into the more lucrative aspects of his business. She spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, jumping at every sound, checking the small clock behind the bar as the hours crawled by. At 3:30, she slipped upstairs to change into her traveling clothes, the simple blue dress and jacket she'd worn on the stagecoach, and waited by the window, watching the street below. At precisely 4 o'clock, Jacob arrived, riding a tall chestnut horse and leading a second mount, a dappled mare with a gentle eye. He dismounted and strode toward the saloon entrance with purpose in every step. Nora took a deep breath and headed downstairs to face whatever came next. She found Jacob and Harlan in the saloon's back office, their voices raised in argument. She paused outside the partially open door, listening. "This is ridiculous, Harrington," Harlan was saying. "The girl owes me money. She can't just walk out of here because you've taken a fancy to her." "I'm offering to pay her debt in full," Jacob replied evenly, "plus an additional $50 for your trouble. That's generous by any measure. Maybe I don't want to sell. Maybe she's worth more to me here." "She's not merchandise, Fischer." Harlan's laugh held no humor. "Everything's merchandise out here. You know that as well as I do." $300, Jacob said. "That's my final offer." There was a long silence and Nora held her breath. Finally, Harlan spoke again. "You know, I've been wondering why you're so interested in my cattle purchases. Now I think I understand. This isn't about the girl at all. You're trying to get closer to my operation." "This is about giving Miss Sullivan the chance she came west for," Jacob insisted. "Nothing more." "Bullshit. But fine. 300 and she's all yours. Just remember, if I find out you're poking around in my business, our next conversation won't be nearly so civilized." Nora stepped back as the office door swung open. Harlan emerged first, his face tight with suppressed anger. When he saw her, his expression shifted to a mocking smile. "Well, look who's all packed and ready to go. Eager to leave us, are you, Nora?" "Mr. Fischer," he waved dismissively. "Save it. Your debt's been paid. You belong to Harrington now." Jacob appeared behind him, jaw clenched. "Miss Sullivan doesn't belong to anyone, Fischer. She's accepted a position as a teacher for my ranch hand's children." Harlan snorted. "Call it what you want. We both know what's really happening here." He turned to Nora. "When you get tired of playing schoolmarm for this self-righteous bastard, don't come crawling back. You won't find the welcome so warm." He stomped away toward the bar, leaving Nora and Jacob standing awkwardly in the hallway. "I'm sorry about that," Jacob said quietly. "Are you ready to go?" Nora nodded, unable to trust her voice. Relief and uncertainty warred within her as she followed him out into the late afternoon sunshine, where the two horses waited patiently. "The mare is yours to use while you're at the ranch," Jacob explained, helping her mount. "Her name is Daisy. She's even tempered, good on the trails." As they rode out of town, Nora felt the weight of the past weeks begin to lift. The road followed the Arkansas River eastward, winding through stands of aspen and pine. The mountains rose majestic on all sides, their peaks still capped with snow even in early summer. "Is it far to your ranch?" Nora asked when they stopped to rest the horses at a small stream. "About 10 miles, Jacob replied. "We'll be there before sundown." He hesitated. "I want to apologize again for Fischer's behavior. The way he spoke about you about this arrangement was unforgivable." "You have nothing to apologize for," Nora said. "You saved me from a fate I don't care to contemplate." Jacob studied her face, his expression troubled. "I don't want you to feel that you've traded one form of servitude for another. This is a legitimate position. The children need education and you'll be paid fairly for your work. If at any time you wish to leave, you're free to do so." "Thank you," Nora said simply. The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tight with emotion. After weeks of being treated as property, his respect felt like rain on parched soil. They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Jacob pointed out landmarks, a rock formation shaped like a sleeping bear, a distant waterfall visible as a silver thread against the mountainside, the boundary line of his property marked by a weathered fence post topped with a cattle skull. "Harrington Ranch," he announced as they crested a rise and the valley spread before them. 2,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, and the best grazing land in the county. The ranch house was larger than Nora had expected, a two-story structure of squared logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Nearby stood a barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, and lanterns glowed in the windows against the gathering dusk. As they approached, the front door burst open and 3 children raced out, followed more sedately by an older woman wiping her hands on an apron. "Uncle Jake." The youngest, a girl with pigtails, called out. "You brought a lady." Jacob dismounted and helped Nora down from her horse. "This is Miss Sullivan," he told the children. "She's going to be your teacher just like I promised." The children regarded Nora with undisguised curiosity, the girl who had spoken and 2 boys, one about 10 and the other a gangly youth on the cusp of adolescence. "These are the Millers," Jacob explained to Nora. "Samuel, Thomas, and Charlotte. Their father, Frank, is my foreman." He turned to the woman who had followed the children. "And this is Mrs. Abernathy, my housekeeper." "Welcome to Harrington Ranch, Miss Sullivan," Mrs. Abernathy said warmly. "We've been looking forward to your arrival." The children haven't stopped talking about having a real teacher since Jake mentioned the possibility. "It's lovely to meet you all," Nora replied, feeling suddenly shy. After weeks of forced brashness at the saloon, genuine warmth left her uncertain how to respond. "Let's get you settled," Jacob suggested. "You must be tired from the journey." Nora followed him and Mrs. Abernathy into the house while a ranch hand led the horses toward the barn. Inside, the main room was spacious and comfortable, with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and bookshelves lining one wall, more books than Nora had seen since leaving Philadelphia. "You'll have the bedroom at the top of the stairs," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "It has a nice view of the mountains, and it's private away from the children's rooms and the master bedroom." The room was simply but tastefully furnished, with a brass bed, oak dresser, washstand, and a small writing desk beneath the window. A colorful quilt covered the bed and fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the windowsill. "It's perfect," Nora breathed, overwhelmed by the contrast with her cramped quarters at the saloon. "Supper will be ready in half an hour," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Take your time getting settled. There's fresh water in the pitcher, and I've laid out towels for you." Left alone, Nora sank onto the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the soft quilt. For the first time since the stagecoach robbery, she felt safe. Whether this feeling would last remained to be seen, but for now, she allowed herself to savor it. Supper was a lively affair, with the children peppering Nora with questions about Philadelphia, books they might study, and whether she knew how to ride. She didn't, but expressed willingness to learn. Jacob mostly listened, occasionally steering the conversation when the children's enthusiasm threatened to overwhelm their guest. Later, when the children had been shooed off to bed, Nora found herself sitting with Jacob on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for bringing me here, but for treating me like a person worth saving." Jacob turned to her, his profile strong against the last light in the western sky. "You didn't need saving, Miss Sullivan. You needed an opportunity. Please call me Nora." "Nora," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. "Then you must call me Jacob." "Why did Harlan Fischer think you were investigating his cattle purchases?" she asked, remembering the saloon owner's accusation. Jacob's expression grew serious. "Because I am. There's been rustling in the area, cattle disappearing from several ranches, including mine. I have reason to believe Fischer's involved in moving the stolen stock north to Wyoming. That's dangerous knowledge, which is why I'd appreciate your discretion," he said. "Fischer already suspects my interest isn't purely agricultural." "Your secret is safe with me," Nora assured him, "though I'm not sure how much help I can be." "You've already helped by confirming my suspicions about Fischer's character," Jacob said. "What he did to you buying a human being in 1875 is unconscionable. If he'll do that, he'll certainly steal cattle." They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through pine needles. "When would you like me to begin teaching?" Nora asked eventually. "Monday would be fine. That gives you a few days to get your bearings." Jacob hesitated. "I should warn you that the children can be a handful. They lost their mother last winter to pneumonia, and Frank's been doing his best, but—" "They're still grieving," Nora finished for him. "I understand. I lost both my parents within a year of each other. It changes a person." "Yes, it does," Jacob agreed softly, and she sensed there was a story there, perhaps his own loss, but didn't feel it was her place to ask. The weekend passed in a blur of activity as Nora familiarized herself with the ranch and prepared for her first lessons. Jacob showed her the small building that would serve as a schoolhouse, formerly a storage shed, now outfitted with a blackboard, desks, and a small stove for winter heating. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it's a start. If things work out, we could build something more substantial next spring." "It's wonderful," Nora assured him, already envisioning how she would arrange the space, what books she would request, how she might decorate the walls with maps and educational charts. On Sunday evening, Frank Miller came to the main house for dinner, a tall, quiet man with the same direct gaze as his children. He thanked Nora sincerely for taking on their education. "My Martha would have been pleased," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She always wanted them to have more learning than we had." "I'll do my best for them," Nora promised. Monday morning dawned clear and bright. Nora rose early, dressed in her blue dress, now freshly washed and pressed, and headed to the schoolhouse with a basket of supplies Jacob had ordered from Denver. The children arrived promptly at 8, their faces scrubbed and hair combed, excitement barely contained. Teaching came naturally to Nora. She assessed each child's abilities, set appropriate lessons, and established firm but fair rules for their small classroom. By the end of the first week, they had settled into a comfortable routine, and Nora found herself truly enjoying the work. She saw Jacob daily, usually at mealtimes or in the evenings when she sometimes read aloud to the household from one of the books in his library. He was often busy with ranch work, riding out before dawn and returning tired at dusk, but he always made time to ask about her day and the children's progress. Gradually, Nora began to learn more about him. He had come west from Boston 10 years earlier, using his inheritance to buy the struggling ranch and build it into one of the most successful operations in the county. He had never married, though according to Mrs. Abernathy's discreet gossip, several local women had set their caps for him. "He's waiting for someone special," the housekeeper confided one afternoon as they preserved peaches in the kitchen. "Someone who shares his interests, books, and ideas, not just breeding stock and land values." Nora tried not to read too much into these comments, but she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever Jacob entered a room, or the way her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally touched passing a dish at dinner. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after her arrival at the ranch, Jacob found Nora on the porch reading a dog-eared copy of Walden. "Thoreau," he noted, sitting beside her. "One of my favorites." "Mine too," Nora said, marking her place. "Though I find myself more drawn to his ideas about simplicity now that I've experienced life out here. The beauty of this place, it makes his philosophy clearer somehow." Jacob's smile was warm. "That's exactly how I felt when I first came west. The city seems overcomplicated after you've lived with the rhythms of nature." "Do you miss Boston?" she asked. He considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the theaters, the bookshops, certain friends. But no, I don't miss the life. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his family connections or bank account." "Unless that man is Harlan Fischer," Nora observed wryly. Jacob's expression darkened. "Fischer represents the worst of both worlds, Eastern greed with Western lawlessness." He paused. "Speaking of which, I need to ride into Salida tomorrow on business. Would you care to accompany me? Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you might need some additional supplies for the schoolroom." Nora hesitated. The thought of returning to the town where she'd been virtually enslaved filled her with apprehension, but she couldn't avoid Salida forever. "Yes, I'd like that. The children need more slate pencils, and I was hoping to find some geography texts." "Excellent. We'll leave after breakfast." The next morning dawned clear and mild. Nora wore her blue dress with a new shawl Mrs. Abernathy had given her, and Jacob helped her mount Daisy with a steadying hand at her waist. The ride to town was pleasant, filled with easy conversation about books, the children's progress, and Jacob's plans for the ranch's expansion. As they approached Salida, however, Nora grew tense. Jacob noticed her discomfort and guided their horses closer together. "We needn't stay long," he assured her. "Just long enough to conduct our business." "I'm being silly," Nora chided herself. "Harlan Fischer has no hold over me anymore." Jacob's expression was grim. "He's still a dangerous man. Stay close to me while we're in town." They left their horses at the livery and walked to the general store, where Nora selected school supplies while Jacob spoke with the proprietor about an order of fencing materials. From there, they visited the bookshop, where Jacob insisted on purchasing not only the geography texts Nora wanted for the children, but also several novels she had admired. "Consider them additions to the ranch library," he said, when she protested the expense. They were loading their purchases onto their horses when a familiar voice called out, "Well, if it isn't the schoolmarm and her benefactor." Nora froze, then turned slowly to face Harlan Fischer, who stood watching them from the boardwalk outside his saloon. "Fischer," Jacob acknowledged coldly. "Harrington." Harlan's gaze shifted to Nora, his eyes moving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're looking well, Nora. Country living agrees with you." "Miss Sullivan is an excellent teacher," Jacob said, stepping slightly in front of her. "The children are thriving under her guidance." "I'm sure they are," Harlan smirked. "And what about you, Harrington? Are you thriving too?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "We need to be going, not so fast." Harlan descended the steps to the street. "I've been meaning to speak with you about those accusations you've been making. Cattle rustling is a serious charge." "I haven't accused anyone by name," Jacob replied evenly. "Just noted that a lot of stock has gone missing and someone's profiting. People talk, rumors spread." Harlan's affable tone didn't mask the threat in his eyes. "It would be a shame if those rumors led to misunderstandings." Jacob's hand moved slightly toward his hip, where Nora now noticed he wore a pistol. "Is that a threat, Fischer?" "Just friendly advice," Harlan replied. This town runs on commerce. Disruptions to that commerce could be problematic for everyone. His gaze flicked to Nora. Everyone. We understand each other, Jacob said coldly. Come on, Nora, we should start back. They mounted their horses and rode out of town, neither speaking until Salada was well behind them. Then Nora let out a shaky breath. He hasn't changed. Men like Fischer rarely do, Jacob agreed grimly. He's afraid of you, Nora observed. Of what you know about his business. Jacob nodded. I've been gathering evidence. Several ranchers have banded together to track the rustling. We're close to proving Fischer's involvement in moving stolen cattle north through Hayes Canyon. That's why he threatened us. I won't let him hurt you, Jacob said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. I give you my word. The intensity in his eyes made Nora's heart race. I trust you, she said simply. The weeks that followed were filled with a new tension. Jacob often rode out with other ranchers, returning late and tight-lipped about their activities. Nora focused on her teaching, trying not to worry, but the shadow of Harlan Fischer's threats hung over the peaceful routine of the ranch. In mid-August, Nora was helping Charlotte Miller master long division when hoofbeats pounded into the yard. Excusing herself, she stepped outside to see a ranch hand dismounting from a lathered horse. Miss Sullivan, he called, spotting her. Is the boss here? No, he rode out this morning with Mr. Miller. What's wrong? Rustlers hit the north pasture last night. Took 20 head at least. Shot the night watchman. He's alive, but barely. Dear God, Nora gasped. Have you sent for the doctor? Already done. Mrs. Abernathy's tending to Pete till Doc arrives. The ranch hand wiped sweat from his brow. I need to find the boss. Did he say where he was headed? Hayes Canyon, Nora replied. They left before dawn. The man nodded grimly. I'll head that way. He remounted, then paused. Miss Sullivan, might be best to keep the children close to the house till we sort this out. No telling if those rustlers are still in the area. After he galloped away, Nora returned to the schoolhouse, her mind racing. She maintained a calm demeanor for the children's sake, but inside she was terrified. The rustlers' boldness suggested they no longer feared consequences, or perhaps they were sending a message to Jacob about his investigation. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered over the mountains, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Nora dismissed the children early, instructing them to go directly to the main house. She was gathering her teaching materials when the first raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. She ran toward the house, clutching her books to her chest, and was halfway across the yard when she heard horses approaching. Looking up through the rain, she expected to see Jacob and his men returning. Instead, 4 riders emerged from the gathering dusk, their faces obscured by bandanas. Nora froze, recognition striking her like lightning. One of the men was Ray, the outlaw who had sold her to Harlan Fischer. She turned to flee toward the house, but Ray spurred his horse forward, cutting off her escape. Well, look who it is, he drawled, pulling down his bandana. Harlan said we might find you here. Nora backed away, her heart hammering. What do you want? Harlan sends his regards, Ray said, dismounting and moving toward her. Says Harrington's been making trouble, needs to be taught a lesson. Taking his prize heifer ought to do the trick. I'm not going anywhere with you, Nora declared, though her voice shook. She looked desperately toward the bunkhouse, but in the driving rain it was unlikely anyone would see her predicament. Ray grabbed her arm. You don't have a choice, sweetheart, just like before. Nora brought her knee up sharply between his legs. Ray doubled over with a howl of pain, and Nora turned to run, only to find her path blocked by another rider who had dismounted. Feisty one, ain't she? He chuckled, reaching for her. A gunshot cracked through the rain, and the man stumbled backward with a look of surprise. Nora whirled to see Mrs. Abernathy on the porch, a shotgun in her hands. "Get away from her, you bastards!" the housekeeper shouted, leveling the gun for another shot. The rustlers scattered, returning fire as they mounted their horses. Nora ran toward the house as bullets splintered the porch railing around Mrs. Abernathy. She had almost reached the steps when something slammed into her shoulder, spinning her around and dropping her to the muddy ground. Pain exploded through her body, and she heard Mrs. Abernathy screaming her name. The world tilted and darkened at the edges as Nora pressed her hand to her shoulder, feeling the warm wetness of blood. She was vaguely aware of more gunfire, shouts, and then strong arms lifting her. Through a haze of pain, she recognized Frank Miller's voice giving orders to the ranch hands who had emerged from the bunkhouse. "Get her inside. Send someone for the doctor. And someone find Harrington." Consciousness faded in and out as Nora was carried into the house and laid on a couch. Mrs. Abernathy's tear-streaked face appeared above her, pressing a cloth to her bleeding shoulder. "Stay with us, child," the housekeeper pleaded. "Jacob will be here soon." Pain washed over Nora in waves, and she surrendered to the darkness. She awoke to the low murmur of voices and the pungent smell of antiseptic. Opening her eyes, she found herself in her bedroom, the lamplight low, her left shoulder thickly bandaged. Jacob sat in a chair beside the bed, his head bowed, his hand gently holding hers. "Jacob," she whispered, her throat dry, his head jerked up, exhaustion and relief warring in his face. "Nora, thank God." He reached for a glass of water on the bedside table, helping her take small sips. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," she managed with a weak attempt at humor. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The doctor says you were lucky. The bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. You'll have a scar, but you should recover fully." Memory rushed back the rustlers, Ray, Mrs. Abernathy with the shotgun. "Is everyone else all right, the children?" "They're fine, scared but unharmed." Mrs. Abernathy took a graze to the arm, nothing serious. His expression darkened. It was Fischer's men. Frank recognized them. "Ray was there," Nora confirmed. "The man who sold me to Harlan," he said. She swallowed hard. "He said they came for me to teach you a lesson." Jacob's hand tightened around hers, his knuckles white. "This ends now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Fischer has gone too far." "What will you do?" Nora asked, fear clutching at her heart. "What I should have done weeks ago." "The sheriff in Cannon City isn't in Fischer's pocket like Bennett here in Salida. I'm riding there tomorrow with evidence of Fischer's rustling operation. With statements from you, Frank, and the others about today's attack, we'll have enough to bring charges." "It's dangerous," Nora protested weakly. "Harlan has men everywhere." Jacob's expression softened as he looked at her. "Some things are worth the risk, Nora." He hesitated, then continued quietly. "When I saw you lying there, bleeding, I thought I'd lost you before I ever had the chance to tell you how I feel." Nora's breath caught. "How you feel?" "I love you," he said simply. "I think I began falling in love with you that first night at the saloon, when you stood there in that ridiculous red dress with your chin up and your eyes full of defiance. You were the strongest, most dignified woman I'd ever seen." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. After what happened with Harlan, with Ray, I didn't trust my judgment." Jacob leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Trust it now," he murmured, and gently pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. The next morning, despite Nora's concerns, Jacob prepared to ride to Cannon City with Frank and 2 other trusted ranch hands. He came to her room before leaving, finding her propped up against pillows, pale but determined. "I'll be back in 3 days," he promised, sitting on the edge of the bed. "4 at most." The ranch hands are under orders not to let anyone near the house, and Mrs. Abernathy has proven she knows how to use a shotgun. Nora managed to smile. I never imagined when I came west that I'd be in the middle of a range war. This isn't how I imagined welcoming you to Colorado either, Jacob admitted ruefully. When you're recovered, I'd like to show you the mountains in autumn, the aspen turning gold, the first snow on the peaks. It's beautiful beyond words. I'd like that, Nora said softly. He leaned down to kiss her goodbye, his lips lingering on hers. When I return, we have much to discuss about the future. Our future, if you're willing. After he left, Nora dozed fitfully, her shoulder throbbing despite the laudanum the doctor had prescribed. She was awakened in the early afternoon by Charlotte Miller, who slipped into the room with a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Uncle Jake said I could visit if you were awake," the girl said shyly, placing the flowers in a glass of water beside the bed. "Are you going to die?" "No, sweetheart," Nora assured her, touched by the child's concern. "I'm going to be just fine." Charlotte perched on the chair Jacob had occupied earlier. "The men who shot you, were they the same bad men who hurt my mama?" Nora blinked in surprise. "I don't think so. What happened to your mother?" "She got sick after bad men came to our cabin when Papa was away," Charlotte said matter-of-factly. "They were looking for Uncle Jake, but he wasn't there. They scared Mama real bad and she got the fever after. That's what Papa says." A cold understanding dawned on Nora. "When was this, Charlotte?" "Last winter, before Christmas." The girl traced patterns on the quilt with her finger. "Uncle Jake was real mad. He and Papa talked about a man named Fischer." Harlan Fisher's involvement went deeper than rustling, Nora realized with growing horror. His vendetta against Jacob had already claimed one life, perhaps indirectly, but no less tragically. "Uncle Jake says you're going to be his wife," Charlotte continued, jarring Nora from her dark thoughts. "He said that?" Nora asked, warmth spreading through her despite her pain. Charlotte nodded solemnly. "He told Papa you were special, that he knew it the first time he saw you. Is that true?" "I think," Nora said carefully, "that sometimes people recognize something important in each other right away, even if they don't understand it yet. Like love at first sight." Charlotte asked, her eyes wide. Nora smiled. "Something like that." The days of Jacob's absence passed slowly. Nora's wound began to heal, and by the third day she was able to sit on the porch for short periods, wrapped in blankets against the September chill. The ranch hands kept a constant vigil, rifles at the ready, but no further trouble came from Harlan Fischer or his men. On the morning of the fourth day, Nora was helping Mrs. Abernathy shell peas at the kitchen table when hoofbeats approached the ranch. They exchanged a worried glance Jacob wasn't expected until evening. Mrs. Abernathy reached for the shotgun leaning against the wall, but before she could lift it, the door burst open and Jacob strode in, travel-worn but triumphant. "It's over," he announced, his eyes seeking Nora's. "Fisher's been arrested. The Cannon City sheriff sent deputies to Salida with warrants. They caught him trying to flee town." Relief washed over Nora. Thank God. Was there trouble? Some. 2 of his men were killed resisting arrest. Ray was wounded but captured. Jacob removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "The evidence was overwhelming once we presented it all together. Stolen cattle, witness statements, assault, attempted kidnapping." And Frank told them about Martha, how Fisher's men frightened her into exposure that led to her pneumonia. "Charlotte told me," Nora said softly. "I had no idea Fisher's grudge against you went back that far." "It started when I first came to Salida," Jacob explained, accepting the coffee Mrs. Abernathy poured for him. "Fisher tried to buy my land for the water rights. When I refused, he began his rustling operation, targeting my herd specifically at first. Then when other ranchers joined with me to stop him, he expanded his targets but kept his personal vendetta. He reached across the table to take Nora's hand. But that's behind us now. Fischer will stand trial in Denver. With the evidence against him, he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. That evening, when Nora was resting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air, Jacob joined her. He seemed oddly nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. "There's something I need to ask you," he said after a moment of silence. "Something I've been thinking about since the day you were shot." Nora's heart quickened. "Yes, life out here is unpredictable, sometimes dangerous," he began. "We never know what tomorrow might bring. When I thought I might lose you, I realized I couldn't waste another day without telling you how I feel, without asking." He drew a deep breath and withdrew a small box from his pocket. "Nora Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond flanked by sapphires. Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Jacob slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. "I should warn you," he said when they finally parted, "that marrying a rancher means embracing all the uncertainties of this life: drought, blizzards, hard times when the market falls." "And I should warn you," Nora replied with a smile, "that marrying a teacher means endless books cluttering the house and strong opinions about how the children should be raised." Jacob laughed. "I look forward to every moment of it." They were married on a crisp October morning, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Colorado sky. The ceremony was held on the ranch, with a justice of the peace from Cannon City officiating. Frank Miller stood as Jacob's best man, while Mrs. Abernathy, dabbing at tears, attended Nora. The children had taken enthusiastically to their role in the wedding, with Charlotte proudly scattering wildflower petals before the bride, and the boys standing solemnly with the rings. Nora wore a gown of ivory satin ordered from Denver, with Mrs. Abernathy's lace veil and a bouquet of late-blooming mountain flowers. Jacob, unaccustomed to formal attire, looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new black suit. "I, Jacob, take thee, Nora, to be my wedded wife," he vowed, his voice strong and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Nora repeated the vows, her voice trembled with emotion. Less than 6 months had passed since she'd arrived in Colorado, a frightened young woman sold to a saloon owner. Now she stood beside the man she loved, surrounded by people who had become family, with a future bright with promise. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you man and wife," the justice declared. "You may kiss your bride." Jacob's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The small gathering erupted in cheers, and Charlotte threw her remaining flower petals into the air like confetti. The celebration that followed was modest, but joyful, a feast prepared by Mrs. Abernathy, music provided by ranch hands with guitars and fiddles, dancing in the yard until the stars appeared in the darkening sky. As night fell, Jacob led Nora away from the festivities toward the house they would now share as husband and wife. In their absence, Mrs. Abernathy and the children had decorated their bedroom with candles and more wildflowers, turning the familiar space into a bridal chamber. "Mrs. Harrington," Jacob said softly, closing the door behind them. "How does it feel?" "Wonderful," Nora replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Like the ending of one journey and the beginning of another." He drew her into his arms, his kiss deeper now that they were alone, filled with longing held in check through months of proper courtship. Nora responded with equal passion, her body awakening to sensations she had only begun to imagine during their brief moments alone. "I love you," Jacob whispered against her lips. "I will spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Their union that night was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love that had grown between them through adversity and danger. In Jacob's arms, Nora found a joy she had never known was possible, the joy of being truly known, truly loved, and truly home. In the months that followed, they settled into the rhythms of married life. Nora continued teaching, expanding her small school to include children from neighboring ranches. Jacob focused on rebuilding his herd after the losses to Fischer's rustlers, traveling occasionally to purchase new breeding stock. News reached them in December that Harlan Fischer had been convicted on multiple counts of cattle rustling, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, effectively ending his reign of terror over Salida. The new year brought another change to the Harrington household when Nora discovered she was expecting their first child. "A baby," Jacob said wonderingly when she shared the news, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. "Our child. Are you pleased?" Nora asked, though his radiant smile had already answered her question. "Beyond words," he replied, gathering her close. "Though I confess to being terrified as well. I know nothing about babies," Nora laughed. "Neither do I. We'll learn together." As summer approached and Nora's pregnancy progressed, they converted a room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery. Jacob built a cradle from pine harvested on their land, while Mrs. Abernathy and Charlotte sewed tiny garments and soft blankets for the expected arrival. On a warm July evening in 1876, after a day of labor attended by Mrs. Abernathy and the midwife from town, Nora gave birth to a healthy son. They named him William, after Jacob's father, with Thomas as his middle name in honor of Frank Miller's middle son, who had become something of a favorite of both Jacob and Nora. Jacob held his son with reverent wonder, tears shining in his eyes. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy head with its shock of dark hair. "Just like his mother." Nora watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The road that had brought her to this moment had been perilous and unexpected, but she wouldn't change a single step of the journey. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn morning much like their wedding day, Jacob and Nora stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. William, now an energetic 5-year-old with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, was teaching his 3-year-old sister, Elizabeth, how to toss a lariat. "Not like that, Lizzie," he instructed with brotherly authority. "You have to hold your wrist just so." Nora leaned against Jacob's solid warmth, his arm around her waist. "They're growing so fast," she observed. "It seems like yesterday William was learning to walk. And now he's teaching his sister to rope cattle," Jacob chuckled. "Though I think Frank's boys have been giving him lessons when we're not looking." They watched as Charlotte Miller, now a poised young woman of 15, emerged from the schoolhouse where she assisted Nora with the younger children. Under Nora's guidance, Charlotte had developed into a promising teacher herself, with plans to attend the normal school in Denver when she turned 18. "I have news from town," Jacob said, turning to face Nora. "Fischer died in prison last week. Pneumonia, apparently." Nora absorbed this information thoughtfully. "I can't say I'm sorry, but I don't feel the satisfaction I might have expected either. He seems like a bad dream from another lifetime." "That's because he is," Jacob said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've built a new life here, we've built it together." "A good life," Nora agreed, looking out over the prosperous ranch with its expanding herds, well-maintained buildings, and the small schoolhouse where she continued to educate the community's children. Beyond the immediate grounds lay thousands of acres of Harrington land, with the majestic Rocky Mountains as a backdrop. "Any regrets?" Jacob asked, studying her face. "About leaving Philadelphia, taking a chance on a wild frontier and a cattle rancher." Nora stood on tiptoe to kiss him, still feeling after all these years the same thrill at his touch. "Not a single one," she assured him. "This is where I belong, with you, with our children, in this life we've made together." As they stood there, Nora's mind briefly flashed back to that desperate day when outlaws sold her to a saloon owner, and a determined cowboy declared she would be his wife instead. What had seemed like the darkest moment of her life had led, through a winding and dangerous path, to this perfect happiness. "I love you, Jacob Harrington," she said softly, "today and always." "And I love you, Nora Harrington," he replied, drawing her close as their children's laughter echoed across the Colorado Valley they all called home. "Today, always, and forever."